When we had finished reading the newspaper's account of the murders, neither Dupin nor myself said anything for a while, but I could see in his eyes that cold, empty look which told me that his mind was working busily. When he asked me what I thought of all of this, I could only agree with all of Paris. I told him I considered it a very difficult problem, a mystery to which it was not possible to find an answer. No, no, said Dupin. No, I think you are wrong. A mystery it is, yes, but there must be an answer. Let us go to the house and see what we can see. There must be an answer. There must. These words are written in Edgar Allan Poe's 1841 story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, often credited as the first written murder mystery in the English language. It's a story about a man named C. Auguste Dupin, a man who solves the murders of two women in Paris in the summer of 1840. Reading it in a modern setting is fascinating because it feels like the starting point for many of the tropes associated with detective fiction today. An eccentric detective, a bumbling constable, or nowadays ineffective police officers, and even a first-person narration from an outside subject, usually a close friend of the detective. You know, the things we see in the works of Sherlock Holmes. Whether or not Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot were inspired by this short story, the fact still stands. Poe's short story here was the force that pushed the boulder down the hill, where it has just been exponentially accelerating in speed since. Mystery fiction had existed before this, but the genre of detective fiction focused on the analysis of crime grew in popularity, so much so that the detective fiction became almost synonymous with murder mysteries. And yet, for the last few decades, as the detective genre has boomed, we've started to see something even stranger start to develop. Not so much the quirky, eccentric detective who wants to solve the mystery for justice, but kind of for someone who wants to solve the mystery for fame, fortune, and attention. The true crime creator. Podcasts, video series, television shows, YouTube videos, documentaries. As visual art like film and audio became more accessible, the ability for people to pick up these real cases of murder, disappearance, and strange death to share them, to try to solve them, has become more common. Some of our mysteries aren't just fiction anymore. True crime has become something obsessive, something people are listening to in the form of podcasts, watching in the form of documentaries, and based on a true story miniseries having attractive actors like Zac Efron and Evan Peters playing the horrifying serial killers Ted Bundy and Jeff Dahmer. And it's at this crossroads where fascination and exploitation meet, where Only Murders in the Building fits in. Only Murders in the Building is probably one of my favorite series on Hulu right now, at least for the first 3 seasons. It centers around the story of Charles, Oliver, and Mabel, a trio of unlikely friends who come together to create a podcast based on a murder that occurred within their apartment building, the extravagant Arconia in New York City, and how they work together to solve it. It's got amazing humor, fabulous dynamic between our 3 leads, and honestly beautiful and artistic cinematography, art direction, and style. There's a lot to talk about this show, but today I want to focus on one specific idea: how the show itself handles the genre of true crime. Our 3 protagonists first meet after a fire alarm goes off in their building. They have to huddle down in a nearby restaurant while the police and fire department investigate what exactly happened. And all 3 protagonists love the podcast called All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma. It starts with them bonding over a murder that they're far away from, but then it shifts immediately to a murder they're all incredibly close to. A young man, Tim Kono, another resident of the Arconia, died when the fire alarm went off. The police have ruled it a suicide, but the 3 of them become convinced that Tim Kono didn't kill himself, but was murdered, and they set about to solve this murder mystery while also creating a podcast on the side called Only Murders in the Building, hence the creative title of the series. But what's the most fascinating about this series, and especially the first season, which I will be focusing on for this video, is that the story isn't just the murder solving. It's also the character drama of creating a true crime podcast while simultaneously investigating that same murder. It deconstructs the genre in a way that becomes accessible and palpable for everyone, for people who like true crime and for people who don't. So let's take the time to break this down today. How Only Murders in the Building dissects the idea of the true crime genre and why we love the mystery and the tragedy and the ethical issues true crime media inherently has. Video is sponsored by me. Okay, so in my last video, I asked if we could make it to 500 subscribers by Halloween, and y'all blew it out of the park. I was not expecting to get that much attention on my video, and I'm very thankful for everything, but we've definitely made it past 500 subscribers by now. As of recording, we're sitting at 2.4, so how about let's try to make it to 4,000 by Halloween? It seems like a lot. Anyway, on with the video.
And now, our feature presentation.
lot of reasons as to why we love a good mystery. All kinds of mystery fiction, including true crime, mysteries based on real life, mentally engage us in ways other genres of storytelling typically don't, because they're asking the audience the same question: who did this? The genre encourages people to try to solve the mystery alongside, or maybe even before, the detectives do. That sort of curiosity is triggered too when we engage in true crime media as well. Even though it's a real tragedy that happened to real people, often the method in which true crime is made and presented to their audiences creates a distance. People recognize these cases are real, of course, but they also don't, because it's not directly affecting them. Even if they don't see it, sometimes true crime can become fictionalized and sensationalized in our brains, and we can become attracted to the story and narrative of it all while completely forgetting that real victims exist. These stories become an escape for people, as many stories do, even if they're based on real people, because mysteries can make sense. They can provide solutions even when cases aren't solved. They still have a way of making sense to their audience. And maybe that's why true crime has become the safe place for Oliver, Charles, and Mabel. Let's look into their different backgrounds real quick. Charles is a former star. He hit it big with his detective character Brazos, a crime procedural series on the level of Law and Order in Columbo. The eponymous Brazos goes on wild adventures solving mysteries around New York City, including an episode where he shoots an alligator that was smuggling drugs. Okay? Since that series ended though, he hasn't been getting much other work and spends most of his time holed up in his apartment in the Arconia. His last relationship ended a while ago, and while he wants to reconnect with his ex's young daughter that he was close to, he's still kind of just a lonely old guy. All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma, to Charles, represents the past he once had, even if he wasn't a real detective. It's a great thing to escape to. Oliver, too, is a former star, though he's from the theater world, representing the other half of New York City's stardom. And like Charles, he's also struggling, not having had a theater hit since a musical called Splash, which led to the serious accidental injuries of multiple people on opening night. Following that, his wife, Roberta, divorced him, and he's been living alone in the Arconia with his dog, Winnie, since. He struggles to make his rent payments, but really doesn't have anywhere else to go. He's a theatrical storyteller and probably feels attracted to true crime because of how theatrical it can be portrayed. All Is Not Okay acts as an escape for him too from the issues he's dealing with in his life, an odd escapism that matches his odd character. And finally, Mabel. Mabel is a young millennial woman who is temporarily staying in the Arconia to renovate her aunt's apartment. But while she didn't live in the Arconia until recently, her wealthy aunt would have her over during school breaks, and she would get into trouble with the younger kids who lived there at the time, and they would pretend they were the Hardy Boys, making up mysteries. Zoe Cassidy, Oscar Torres, and none other than Tim Kono himself. Oscar's father was the Arconia superintendent, whatever that means, so he copied the key that allows him to get into all the apartments, so the Hardy Boys could break into any apartment while the owners were out of town, and despite being rather rich herself, Zoe would steal things while they did so. During a New Year's Eve party when they were still young-ish, Zoe was pushed from the rooftop and killed, and it led to Oscar being sent to prison for Zoe's murder. All Is Not Okay plays on Mabel's love of solving mysteries, evident in the Hardy Boys series she used to read voraciously as a kid. And despite the three of these characters having different relationships with true crime, it's the community that helps them connect and bond at first. They're all attracted to the mystery of All Is Not Okay, and finding solace in other weirdos who are in the same thing they're into is nice. So when they stumble on Tim Kono's body after sneaking back into the Arconia, and the three of them deduce together that he was murdered, they decide not to just solve the mystery, but to jump into making a true crime podcast along the way, inspired by what they are passionate about. Or, well, it's mostly Oliver who wants to make the podcast because he's behind on rent and needs a get-rich-quick scheme, and Charles and Mabel are kind of dragged into it along the way, but if they really, really didn't want to, I'm sure they would have put up more of a fight. The trio jumps into true crime investigation with a giddy amateurism. There's a murder board, sneaking through the Arconia's secret tunnels, awkward interrogations, and absolutely zero legal training. The investigation into Tim Kono's death is clumsy from the very beginning. For the most part, they're just running around the Arconia and New York City like chickens with their heads cut off. A horrifying sight, but also incredibly hilarious at the same time. They fumble their way through clues and identify suspects, including their cat-loving neighbor Howard and the literal singer Sting playing himself, but most of those accusations are dropped in the same episode. All throughout their murder investigation, the trio comes face to face with an odd sort of sudden stardom. People are enjoying the work they're doing too, and they don't know how to react. Honestly, kind of relatable. The dichotomy of the story is what makes it the most interesting to me, at least. On the one hand, we have a depressing murder investigation of someone who was close to one of our main characters a long time ago, but the distance and trauma drove them apart. The investigation stakes start targeting them individually too. Oliver's dog Winnie is found poisoned, but luckily not killed. The love interest of Charles, Jan, a bassoonist player, I think I said that right, gets stabbed but survives. The stakes become high and chaotic and sudden. But on the other hand, we have the more interpersonal stakes of creating a podcast. Charles and Oliver end up taking a small sponsorship deal for gut melt from the security officer of the Arconia to get more information on Tim Kono, and later from Teddy Dimas, the owner of a local Greek restaurant. Episode 8 even focuses on the perspective of the show from the fans of the show, a small group called the Arconiacs who helped them tie the murder to the Dimases, the same people who sponsored their podcast. But then the Dimases were the actual killers, and it turns out to be Jan, Charles's new love interest all along, and he almost dies from poison in the season finale. Both hands are chaotic and messy and unruly, but I'd argue it's one of the show's greatest strengths, not a weakness. Because our lives aren't neat and orderly, they're all messy as heck. Just take one look at, anything in the world, really, and you can see chaos everywhere. It shows everything from how unprofessional their podcast recording is to how clumsy their investigation is. But also, there's, I think, a heart and a passion in this too. It does start with Charles trying to make friends, Oliver trying to make money, and Mabel trying to make things right again. They all have different reasons for making this podcast, but in making the podcast, they come together united to solve the murder of Tim Kono and find justice properly and become closer because of it. And they don't just solve the murder of Tim Kono, they find out the real killer of Zoe Cassidy they uncover a grave robbing scheme between Teddy Dimas and his son Theo, the murders of Jan's previous lovers, and stop Jan from killing everyone in the Arconia. It's kind of fascinating how all of these things fit in the first season of Only Murders without feeling too bloated. That's because of how everything is connected. Theo is connected to the murder of Zoe, which is connected to Mabel and Tim, and then connected to Jan, and then connected to Charles and the Arconia. You'd need probably about 7 feet of red yarn to tie all of this together on your own murder board. And despite it being a comedy show about a technical true crime, there's also still a respect placed on the victims, at least with the tone of the story. Charles, Oliver, and Mabel may be bumbling fools through their investigation, but the show still holds respect for death that could have been thrown out the window if they only wanted to focus on the comedy aspect. It just feels right in a way that I feel is kind of hard to explain.
But hopefully that vibe is picked up by the context I've given with the show.
There are 17 million video essays on YouTube about the ethics and responsibilities of true crime creators, both about YouTubers and about documentary filmmakers. So I'm not going to make this a deep dive into that topic. But I think Only Murders highlights the murky ethics of true crime content, at least in the first season, without it making a big point. It's subtle. People might not pick up on it if they're not thinking too deeply about it, but Only Murders asks the question quietly, more like a whisper than a scream. When does telling someone else's story cross the line? True crime content is monetized suffering, usually the suffering of other people, not yourself. There are some creators who take the time to get the actual victims or the families of the victims, if they're no longer here, to talk on their behalf about the case, to tell their story, but that's rare. Most creators today will synthesize a day or two of research into a script and then just read it out to their camera, maybe leave a few jokes in there for the audience, and apparently still doing makeup videos. I haven't watched true crime content for years, but when I was into it, it was everywhere. Makeup videos, mukbangs, tea sessions. YouTube was the least professional place for true crime media. I feel like it has shifted back into tackling these serious topics the way they should with respect, but some creators still get into hot water for their phrasing and subjects every few months. You have to be extremely careful and thoughtful when you make true crime media to make it ethical. And Only Murders quietly asks us this, and how we should handle it. I mean, let's just look at Cindy Canning, the host of the show All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma. She has created a media empire based on her podcast, and the trio seeks her out for assistance in episode 4, The Sting. She's become such a popular star, winning Peabody Awards in 2018 and 2020 respectively. She's about to be bought for $30 billion. Not her brand or anything, but herself. She is professional, organized, investigative, and has a recording studio. She is everything our trio is not at the start. They fall over themselves when they can finally meet her, but her advice at first is to take someone else's course in podcast making. Their conversation at first is not about the investigation, it's about selling it. Eventually, she gives them the advice to bring someone a 20-pound turkey like she did for the mayor in her own podcast. And she tries to clarify that it's not a literal turkey, but they still bring a real one anyway to interrogate Sting. It becomes a bit more evident in season 2, but Cinda is not at all ethical in the creation of her podcast. The small bit of her narration at the end of episode 4 hints about it. In the middle of talking about real tragedy of human pain and death, she then starts a sponsorship from Squarespace.
And remember, if you need a domain, website, or online store, make it with Squarespace.
It's horrifyingly accurate to the genre, not gonna lie. I think throughout the first season, it becomes almost too easy for the audience to forget that Tim Kono is a real person in their universe. Of course, he was real enough to Mabel, but since she was the only one who really knew him, it's easy for Charles and Oliver to forget that he lived and died here, and that his tragedy is a real tragedy. It gets muddied in the waters of content, until episode 10, the season finale. See, the thing I like about Only Murders is their take on perspective. Almost every episode has narration from a different character. Like episode 4 is Cinda Canning. Episode 7, the boy from 6B, is Theo Demas, the deaf son of Teddy Demas, and the episode is shot with only 3 words of spoken dialogue, the rest being muted and in American Sign Language. The approach to the perspective is fun in this series, and the side characters of the fans of the podcast get a chance to shine too, and it reminds the audience that who tells the story changes everything. And then the narrator of episode 10 is revealed.
My name is Tim Kono. I lived in apartment 9A here at the Arconia. Approximately 12 minutes from now, I will be murdered.
And it's Tim Kono. Suddenly, the audience is reminded that Tim Kono is more than just a plot device, more than just the MacGuffin of the series. He was a real person in this world, a real person who lived and died. His sudden post-mortem appearance is startling at first, especially if you're only watching one episode a week like I did. It's almost haunting how suddenly Tim Kono comes back into the narrative. He looks directly at the camera and introduces himself to the audience and says, 12 minutes from now, I'll be murdered. This is such a fascinating way to wrap up a murder mystery. The story from the victim's perspective is what true crime content should be about. Not just the murderer, not just the investigation, not just the podcaster, but the victim. Tim Kono, being the final perspective character, summarizes the big message that Only Murders is trying to subtly remind the audience, at least in the first season. At the end of the day, whatever media is created, podcasts, YouTube videos, docuseries, what have you, the ethical question at the heart of season 1 is simple but powerful. True crime stories should remember to honor the people whose lives were lost. And by letting Tim close off the story, we're reminded about who the story was about all along. So I guess here comes the final question. How does Only Murders deconstruct true crime as a genre? Let's first talk about what it means to do that. To deconstruct a genre, the piece of work usually must include at least some of the following things: the cliches and tropes of the genre, then flipping it out and exposing them. It can also subvert the bigger genre expectations and embracing a sort of meta-awareness. For example, Scream is an excellent deconstruction of the slasher film genre. It plays with the cliches of the genre, a mass killer, a final girl, bloody violence, but then twists it on its head and exaggerates its other aspects. It's meta about itself, and it's self-referential to other horror movies that inspired it. Deconstructing true crime is hard because it's meant to be based on real life. There's no way to deconstruct a crime that happened, but we can look at the meta tropes of the genre, the things that podcasts and docuseries and YouTube videos commonly fall into, and those deconstructions are visible in Only Murders in the Building. True crime often has theatrical dramatics, sometimes recreating the final moments of a victim. They also sometimes don't have a clear focus. Sometimes they focus too much on the killer or the drama around the crime and not the victims. And of course, you can't forget the voracious audience reaction to the media itself.
Oh my God, do we have fans?
And Only Murders tackles each of these subjects within its first season. Let's start with the presentation. The show itself is artistic and dramatic in its presentation. There are dramatic voiceovers from the main cast and other characters, intense rivalries and character clashes, and campy moments that make the show feel like an exaggerated saturation of the murder mystery genre. The characters are colorful and theatrical, like they're all characters playing in a stage play, and the writing matches the vibes to make it not overwhelming, but also exciting as well. And the drama is high. Our trio, as clumsy and amateur sleuths, point their fingers in every direction. They point their finger at Howard, their cat-loving neighbor, first, but then they find out there's no way he can kill anything because he faints at a single drop of blood. And then they accuse Sting, yes, the musician who's playing himself, but then Sting breaks down when he realizes Tim was murdered because he's been struggling with the idea that he drove Tim to suicide. Even as Teddy and Theodemus are accused by the trio and later arrested, they're still not right, and it's portrayed as the accurate, clumsy blunder it is. Not to mention, a majority of the series and the podcast is focused on the investigation, on the character drama between Mabel, Oliver, Charles, and the characters around them, whether they're connected to the murder or not. And then at the very end of the show in the season finale, after an adventure across New York City, it snaps back to Tim Kono. He's the narrator of the final episode, and while it's an excellent ethical reflection, like I mentioned before, it's also an excellent commentary too on how a majority of true crime media is produced. It is produced for mostly the profit and fame of creators, to tell a dramatic story, and it rarely focuses on the victims themselves. As of the first 4 seasons, this is the only time the final episode starts with the victim. Season 5 is still airing as of writing this video, and there's no way I'm finishing it by the end of making this. The following 3 seasons start with their final episode around the killer, and I think that's such a shame because it's such a good commentary and critique on how true crime can be unethical with its lack of focus on the victim. Now, of course, there are episodes in the later seasons that do have the victim as the main focus. They're usually early. I think it works a lot better to have their victim character be portrayed in the final episode as a reminder to the audience that this character was real to this universe, and that needs to be acknowledged. We also have a thick layer of meta icing on top of this deconstructionistic cake. The cake, of course, is a metaphor for the audience. Audiences of true crime media can exist in the same murky waters as creators. I mean, do I need to bring up the people who were and are attracted to serial killers, the people who complain that Dahmer didn't have enough gore for them, and the people who take these stories as fun, quirky, dark escapism instead of talking about them with the weight they deserve? And Only Murderers tries to dissect this in the first season to the best it can, without it getting too serious since this is also a comedy. For starters, the trio, Charles, Mabel, and Oliver, as I said before, are all connected through a true crime podcast, and their investigation methods range from crazy enough to take on weird sponsorship on their show to low-key illegal breaking and entering. And oftentimes, whether the true crime creators are retelling stories or investigating, sometimes they do end up committing crimes, or at least very weird moral decisions. And it'd be a crime to not mention Cinda Canning here again too. She's like textbook satire of the true crime industrial complex, and all these jokes are written about her are aimed at not so subtly at the genre. And of course, there are the Arconiacs, the small fan group that appears in episode 8, Fan Fiction. The Arconiacs are a small group of dedicated fans who want to help the trio unravel the mystery of Tim Kono as well. However, their interactions with the trio are marred by an awkward mixture of fictionalization and idol worship. Not to mention, when they bring the Arconiacs in the mix to help them solve it, they end up implicating and blaming Teddy and Theodemus, who were not involved in the murder of Tim Kono, and accidentally get them arrested. Dan being there too to drive the suspicion away from her doesn't help, but the point still stands that this is a meta-commentary on the damage that true crime can cause. Dramatics focus audience. Even when tackled with levity and comedy, these 3 topics put together help Only Murders deconstruct the idea of true crime through a fictionalized story. They help ask, when you love a mystery so much and want to solve it, why do you want to solve it? And how are you going to do it in a way that honors the victims? For all the ragging I've done on true crime in this video, I do think that it has a lot of potential to do a lot of good for the victims of these cases. When done correctly, they can bring attention to old buried cold cases, police or government corruption, and exonerate innocent people who were wrongly jailed for a crime they didn't commit. Only Murders in the Building's first season acts as a good deconstruction of the true crime genre. It tackles the issues with the media, both in subtle and unsubtle ways, through the actions the characters commit, the ways they interact, and how the narration works on a meta level. struggle. And I think it's the perfect way to do a deconstruction of true crime. If you tried to do this with a real crime, it would really fall flat and be very disrespectful to the victim. But since it's a fictionalized series about a true crime podcast, it is allowed to do this. It is allowed to have moments where characters act like idiots and assholes around dead bodies and grieving families, because it's for justice and the truth, isn't it? But the writing acts as a comedic commentary and satire on what happens in real life. We can experiment with that in fiction in a way that can't hurt people. Only Murders following seasons are also very well written, but they miss the magical commentary on true crime that season 1 has. They just fall into the typical murder mystery series with the added touch that our plucky detectives are also recording everything for a podcast to make money with, which, while it is a fun topic, is still a little bit disappointing. Season 2 does continue with the impact of what a true crime podcast can do to the person that is making it, especially when they are implicated in a crime like Mabel, but even then, the same magic in the first season isn't really recaptured as well, and it's just a little disappointing. But you know, the first season still exists and hasn't been wiped off the face of the internet yet, so we can still discuss and break down how the show acts as a very good deconstruction of true crime. Also, Selena Gomez is really pretty okay. That's it, that's the video, bye. Alright, well, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I am trying to get some more spooky videos out for the month of October. I'll have 2 more coming out, another one in about a little more than a week, and then something on actual Halloween. So stick around, keep your eye out for some fun stuff coming out, and yeah, let me know what you guys think about this video in the comments down below. As always, like, share, subscribe, do whatever YouTube wants you to, and thank you again for getting me past 2,000 subscribers when I only asked for 500 in the last video. That's been kind of crazy. All right, well, I don't have anything else to say, so keep your heads in the clouds, guys. Bye-bye. During a New Year's Eve